and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya headquarters. We are continuing our special coverage of the escalating strikes between Iran and Israel. Tensions rose after Israel's surprise strike on Iran's military and nuclear facilities last Friday, a move aimed at halting Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran hit back, launching missiles at Tel Aviv. What's fueling this escalation and how far could it actually go? Stay with us. A full analysis is coming up next. Iran has launched new ballistic missile strikes on Tel Aviv and Haifa, a key seaport in northern Israel. This comes after the Israeli military once again bombed the Iranian capital, Tehran. Israel says its air force has so far destroyed around one-third of Iran's missile launchers since the fighting began. Footage has emerged showing an Israeli military strike near the compound of Iran's state TV studio. Iranian anchor was delivering the news when the studio shook from the impact, prompting her to leave mid-broadcast. For more on this, I'm joined by Freelance reporter Noga Trannopolski. She's joining us live from Jerusalem. Noga, a pleasure to have you on the show. Fast-moving, developing situation, explosions and damage across Israel and Iran after the fresh airstrikes were launched. What is the situation on the ground in Israel currently?
It's been fairly quiet in Israel for the last few hours after a morning in which there were basically non-stop sirens in different parts of the country. There were nationwide warnings of air raids, incoming missiles all through the night, and then through the morning, more specific, some from the north part of the country, more in the south. In Jerusalem now, it's been quiet for a few hours, although we are told not only by Iranian officials, but also warned by the Israeli military that we should expect an escalation of the Iranian retaliation against Israel at any moment.
So, Noga, as you say, quiet now, but the number killed in Israel since Friday has risen to 24. Has there been a change of mood in Israel since retaliatory strikes from Iran?
Well, it's a significant change of mood. Most Israelis support this operation as it was presented to them by the Prime Minister on Friday. In other words, as an operation to eliminate once and for all the nuclear threat from Iran. That's what was presented to them. But Israelis have gotten accustomed to being able to trust the Iron Dome system against the missiles and rockets launched by Hamas from Gaza. Those are much smaller and much less powerful projectiles than what Iran is launching. And Israelis have gotten used to being able to feel safe, relatively speaking, in their bomb shelters. And the last 2 or 3 days since this operation started has really shaken that faith, because the Iron Dome, while working, according to the military, at 95%, it does not provide a hermetic protection. And 5 sites in Israel were hit in the last 24 hours, despite the success of the anti-missile batteries. And one of the couples who were killed, who have not yet been identified, but a couple who was killed in the Tel Aviv satellite city of Petah Tikva, died in their safety room, in their bomb shelter, following instructions. But that shelter got a direct hit of one of these massive missiles. And, you see military spokesmen throughout the day who are resorting to just saying, listen, we can't provide 100% protection. So Israelis are very concerned and alarmed. And at the same time, I think at least some are responsive to the kind of punchy messages from Prime Minister Netanyahu, who looks like he's really gotten his bounce back in the last few days after months and months and months of being held responsible for the failures of the Gaza war, the failures to bring the hostages back. And he's generally been quite unpopular among Israelis.
So, am I reading the situation right, that Israelis are possibly backing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in this move against Iran, and they did feel, the Israeli people, that Iran was posing an imminent threat to the country. This did come to Israelis as a surprise. In part, let me add a detail. The son of the prime minister, Avner Netanyahu, was supposed to be getting married this evening, as you and I speak. And there was one assumption very prevalent in Israel, that the prime minister would do nothing that could possibly wreck such an important, happy event for his family. It was a real big thing here in Israel with 2,000 guests. In any event, Israelis were not expecting when it happened, and there's a bit of a confusion here, because on the one hand, Israelis know that Iran presented a clear and present threat, but they've known this for years. They've known it in part through statements by Prime Minister Netanyahu, and they've known it by statements from the Mossad and from other international agencies. On Thursday, we got the report from the UN nuclear watchdog that made it clear that Iran appeared to be aiming for nuclear weaponization. So Israelis are aware of that. But I don't think that they have gotten any explanation, persuasive explanation, about why it had to be precisely on Friday, about what were the circumstances that came together to make it opportune right now. And so there have been some questions about the political opportunism of this for the prime minister. But I do think that as a general matter, Israelis understand the threat that Iran posed. Now, on the other hand, they are living through that threat as a matter of daily life, hunkered down, locked into their homes, and I'm not sure how long of a leash they're going to be giving the government for this war without demanding that Israel turn towards negotiations. Noga, according to CBS News, Trump does not intend to sign a G7 statement on Israel and Iran. That coming out today as the G7 leaders meet. Is this good news for Israel? Is it a signal that Donald Trump will be on the side of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
We don't know. Donald Trump in general doesn't like to sign any group statements, certainly when he hasn't initiated them. And the relationship between Donald Trump and Netanyahu right now is a bit mysterious, and among other things appears to be being carried out in, tweets and public statements. So we don't know. The United States is supporting Israel in terms of military support, and I would say kind of muted diplomatic support so far. But if Israel expands this operation significantly or moves away from its official war objectives and really hits hard at political leadership or at national infrastructure that doesn't appear to have any connection to the nuclear program, I'm not sure that will last, and I'm not sure that the Trump administration will view this as congruent with the American regional interests.
Thank you so much for that. That was freelance reporter Noga Trannopolski joining us live there from Jerusalem. A pleasure to have you on the show. Now, Iran is calling on Britain, France and Germany to pressure Israel and condemn its attacks on Iranian nuclear sites. In response, EU chief Ursula Vondelion said Iran must never obtain a nuclear weapon, adding that diplomacy remains the best solution. A message she also conveyed to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. For more on the EU's reaction on the latest strikes, I'm joined by Yuri Rosenthal, the former Foreign Secretary of the Netherlands and Iran Free Committee Chairman. Yuri, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. How concerning are the escalating strikes between Israel and Iran for European allies? The Dutch government has issued a rare travel warning for the countries.
I would say, Madam, that it's of course a serious concern for Europe, for the European Union. And let me also say in this respect that, of course, three of the European countries, two of them being members of the EU, Germany and France, and as a third one, the UK, which is now outside the EU, they, of course, are partners in the continuous efforts which have been made to get to a nuclear deal, and they are still in process on this. And at the moment, as far as I hear, these so-called E3 are now indeed considering, for instance, the consequences of what is happening with the nuclear deal and the fact that the President Trump doesn't like what the Iranians are doing. The E3, so UK, France, and Germany, are discussing, for instance, the snapback sanctions.
As a former Foreign Secretary of the Netherlands, is it possible European allies, the three you were just mentioning, will be pulled into the conflict to protect Israel? And what exactly will this entail, and what will it look like?
Well, as far as I know, but it is just for me not intimate knowledge, up till now, France and the UK, for instance, have not been actually involved actively also in helping Israel with regard to countering the barrage of ballistic missiles from Iran. But this is only knowledge which I pick up from the media and from some of the experts I've talked to.
Yuri, Israel has targeted Iran's top brass, among those the Revolutionary Guard's chief. How much does this weaken al-Khamenei's grip on power on the regime in Iran?
I would say this is a considerable setback for the Ayatollah regime, because the Revolutionary Guard is actually, together with the supreme leader, they are the powers that be in Iran, as well as when we talk about the long arm of the Ayatollah regime, also into the direction of, for instance, Europe.
How much of a threat is Iran's uranium enrichment program to Israel and the rest of the world? Despite the IAEA report, it seems unclear if Iran was actually close to creating a nuclear bomb.
Well, madam, here I can go back nearly 15 years when I was a Minister of Foreign Affairs for my country, and we already saw the first signs of Iran not meeting the standards which were set by the International Atomic Agency. And we are seeing here actually the numerous rehearsals of what happened already since 2011, when we saw the first signs of Iran modeling actually its nuclear data in the direction of weaponization and getting an atomic bomb. And right now, the International Atomic Energy has actually, for the first time, as far as I know, in very firm statement, concluded that Iran regime, unfortunately for them, cannot be trusted and actually is deceitful when it is about giving the right and appropriate information to the International Atomic Agency. So here we have really let me say, a next step in which the international community should actually say that everything is focusing now on the question how long it will take for Iran to actually get a atomic bomb. The estimations are actually varying from a few days to a few weeks to a few months. And this is a direct threat, of course, to Israel. And right now, from the Israeli end, they say, and I can understand that when they get this barrage of missiles, God forbid that they would send missiles with an atomic warhead.
Yuri, I just want to put something to you, that Iran has always said its nuclear program is peaceful. And I want to know, are Israel's actions violating international law? And does Iran have the right to self-defense in this situation?
Your question is actually, for some people, and I would be inclined to also include myself, you're a little bit turning this thing upside down, because for Israel, it is now a matter of what we call in international law a preemptive strike. It is a matter not of choice, according to Israel, but a matter of necessity to anticipate the moment that Iran, the Ayatollah regime, I should say, would have an atomic weapon and missiles with an atomic warhead.
So yesterday, tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets in the Netherlands seeking government action against Israel. Is the government listening to the people's concerns? And I know those protests were concerning the situation in Gaza, something, Yuri, we cannot forget.
Yeah. Well, it's quite remarkable, this what happened in this demonstration. There were thousands and thousands of people protesting to the Israeli policies towards Gaza. That's one. But what's quite remarkable is that among those protesters were also, I would call them Ayatollah Iranians, who were actually carrying banners of and glorifying the Revolutionary Guard and the nuclear scientists who have been killed by the Israelis. So here you see a very peculiar and I would say disturbing situation where protesters against the policies of policies of Israel towards Gaza, which are protests based on the concern about human rights, freedom, etc., they are getting mixed up with people who are endorsing, and more than that, the Ayatollah regime, which is just on the opposite of the equation, namely repressing its own people and destabilizing the situation in the Arab region.
Yuri Rosenthal, the former Foreign Secretary of the Netherlands and Iran Free Committee Chairman, thank you for your insights. A pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Now, a reminder about the situation so far. Iran has launched new ballistic missile strikes on Tel Aviv and Haifa, a key seaport in northern Israel. This comes after the Israeli military once again bombed the Iranian capital, Tehran. Israel says its air force has so far destroyed around 1/3 of Iran's missile launchers since the fighting did begin. Footage has also emerged showing an Israeli striking near the compound of Iran's state TV studio. The Iranian anchor was delivering the news when the studio shook from the impact, prompting her to leave mid-broadcast. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. Thousands of people took to the streets of Spain, Portugal and Italy on Sunday to protest against over-tourism. Activist groups say over-tourism increases the cost of living, causes traffic and makes it impossible for locals to find affordable housing. The World Travel and Tourism Council reports that travel spending in Europe is expected to rise by 11% to $838 billion this year, with France and Spain set to receive record numbers of tourists. Investigators have recovered the cockpit voice recorder from the crashed Air India flight. The recorder was in the aircraft's second black box, which authorities did find yesterday. The first, containing the flight data recorder, was located hours after the disaster on Thursday. Meanwhile, today, the same type of aircraft involved in last week's crash, an Air India Boeing 7878 Dreamliner, had to return to Hong Kong mid-flight after a suspected technical issue. A 57-year-old in Minnesota has been arrested on suspicion of killing a Democratic state lawmaker and her husband. Vance Bolter was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree attempted murder. Bolter posed as a police officer when he shot dead Melissa and Marc Hauptman in their home on Saturday. The suspect also allegedly shot and wounded another Democratic lawmaker and his wife at their home a few miles away. President Donald Trump has directed U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to expand deportation efforts in cities run by Democrats, mainly Los Angeles, Chicago and New York. Daily quotas increased from 100 arrests per day to 3,000. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, said in late May that they had deported around 200,000 people. Let's get back to our main story. And an Israeli strike has hit a hospital in western Iran, and that's according to Iran's foreign minister, who called the attack a war crime. Israel's prime minister says that his country is on the path to victory, aiming to white out Tehran's nuclear and missile threats. Netanyahu is urging civilians to evacuate the Iranian capital. As the strikes do continue for the 4th day, the civilian death toll has increased on both sides. For more on this, I'm joined from Tehran by Hamidrezah Gholamzadeh, Foreign Affairs Analyst and founder of Diplohouse. It's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for joining us. Iran's health ministry says Iran's health ministry says 224 people have been killed in Israeli attacks since Friday. Today, Iranian state TV says it has been attacked by Israel. Right now, what is the situation on the ground in Tehran?
You just mentioned many casualties have been victims to these crimes that the Israelis are carrying out. They are deliberately targeting civilians and sleeping areas and residential buildings in order to take more casualties and kill people, with the wishful thinking that it might lead to dissatisfaction and some sort of implosion from within and to topple the government. However, the society here, the community of Iranians, have been very united since Friday, and all the political differences and all the ideological differences have been put aside, and they are really united. I cannot remember any time in the past few years that Iranians have been that united that they are right now. And they have one demand and requirement from the government to retaliate as harsh as possible and severely as possible, because they're killing children, civilians, and women and children, just like what the crimes that they committed in Gaza. They have killed more than 50,000 people, most of them women and children. And they have anything on spot committing crimes against humanity. So that's the same scenario being predicted here. But the difference is that Iran is not Iraq or Afghanistan. Iran is much stronger than Hezbollah and Hamas and this regime is to be punished, and Iran is very determined to do that. So we will continue the retaliation attacks against Israelis, and it will continue until they are punished and they step back.
We are actually just struggling a little bit technically with your line at the moment, but we'll try to see if we can get that a little bit better. So if you just bear with us slightly, apologies for that, a bit of interference on the line. But I did get what you were saying, that the society and the community in Iran appear to be more united than ever before, despite Israel's attacks on the country. I just want to bring you some latest lines that we're hearing from the US President Donald Trump. He is actually saying that he wants Iran to make a deal, and now is the time to make a deal before it is too late. He's been speaking at the G7 meeting in Canada. Are Iran prepared to make a deal with the US? I do apologise. We appear to have lost the guest on this story, but hopefully we can get him back. We had some technical problems there. Hamidrezah Gholamzadeh we had on there, the foreign affairs analyst and founder of Diplohouse. We'll get him back if possible. Just some technical issues. Let's take a look at the top business news now. Renault CEO Luca De Meo is leaving the French car maker to pursue a role outside the auto industry. De Meo will become the new chief executive of luxury group Kering. As head of Renault, he's been key to the car maker's partnership with Nissan, which has been under tension over the past couple of years. Oil prices have risen this morning, up around 1% as the conflict between Israel and Iran enters the fourth day after a 7% surge on Friday. Brent crude is up another 0.5% and it's trading at around $74.60 a barrel. Turning to the sports news now, an American golfer, J.J. Spaun, has won the 2025 US Open Golf Championship. Spaun needed a par on the 18th to secure the victory, with Scotland's Robert McIntyre waiting in the wings. The 34-year-old clinched by far the biggest win of his career as the only player to finish below par in the third major of 2025. Now back to our main story. An Israeli strike has hit a hospital in western Iran, and that's according to Iran's foreign minister, who called the attack a war crime. Israel's prime minister says that his country is on the path to victory, aiming to wipe out Tehran's nuclear and missile threats. Netanyahu is urging civilians to evacuate the Iranian capital as the strikes do continue for the fourth day. The civilian death toll has increased on both sides. So I just want to bring you some more news. Strikes on nuclear sites have raised concerns about the dangers of radiation. The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency is warning of possible radiological and chemical contamination only inside Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz.
Considering the type of nuclear material at this facility, it is possible that uranium isotopes contained in uranium hexafluoride, uranyl fluoride, and hydrogen fluoride are dispersed inside the facility. The radiation, primarily consisting of alpha particles, poses a significant danger if uranium is inhaled or ingested.
So there we are. We just had a clip from the IAEA there. But for more on this, Professor Marc Finard will be joining us right now. He is Associate Fellow at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Marc, great to have you on the show. A pleasure that you've joined us. Marc, you have trained diplomats and military officers in international and human security. What would be your advice to the Israelis and Iranians at this time?
Well, obviously, as many leaders have said, of course, now that it's time for stopping the violence, stopping the escalation, because there is no military solution to this very long and complex conflict. And apparently even the Israelis are not absolutely sure about what their objectives are. Initially, of course, they mentioned the nuclear program of Iran, but as we know, and it's been known for a long time, you cannot completely eradicate such a program with military strikes. Then, of course, they mentioned regime change, collapse of the regime. Again, this is not something that you can achieve through military or airstrikes. And the Iranians, of course, have been very ambiguous. Initially, they said, no, we're just responding to an attack, an aggression, and we only target military facilities in Israel, as you can see on both sides. Again, as in most conflicts now, civilians pay the heaviest price because they are deliberately or inadvertently targeted, and therefore it removes any rationale, any justification, any legitimacy for these military strikes on both sides.
Yes, indeed. As you just explained, civilians involved in these strikes too. But I just want to ask you a little bit more about your experience and training. How much practice is there over theory? I think a lot of questions are being asked, especially when it comes to the threat of nuclear war, which could possibly be on the line here. What are these dangers?
Well, again, it's been on the agenda for many years. Now, of course, we are in a specific situation, specific conflict, and the case of Israel is particular because Israel is a well-known possessor of nuclear weapons already for decades, and it has had a monopoly in the Middle East, because initially it felt that it was surrounded by hostile countries, and it felt that due to its size and its population, it needed to rely on nuclear weapons to defend itself in case of aggression. Now, we know in practice that doesn't work. Israel has been attacked by Arab countries, by Iraq, by Iran in response to Israeli attacks. And we can see that nuclear weapons don't bring stability, don't bring security. And this is the paradox, that Israel wants to prevent Iran from acquiring a weapon that it considers legitimate for its own security. And Iran, disregards this fear or deterrence by Israel by now attacking, responding to Israeli attacks with military strikes, which again, at the same time, is a paradox, because eventually Iran may cross the threshold that it wanted to remain under by developing nuclear weapons with what is left. It's probably been protected from its nuclear program, and therefore becoming a nuclear country, although it doesn't believe in the effectiveness of nuclear deterrence. So again, it's a good lesson in terms of theory and the difference between theory and practice. You have the realists that believe that states only protect their own security through force, but then you have the security dilemma, because if one country fears the offensive capabilities of another country, it will build up its own defense, which Israel claims to have done. But then it raises the fear of other countries that fear that this is offensive, and therefore they will build up their own defense. So this is where nuclear weapons come. And now when you hear people saying, referring to the example of Ukraine, that if Ukraine had kept its, and I say it's, of course, in inverted commas, because it never belonged to them and they were never able to control them. If it had kept these weapons that it got rid of, transfer them to Russia in exchange for security assurances, it would not have been invaded. Now, if you apply this logic, so probably it will also apply to Iran. Iran now has been attacked on a large scale, and most probably it will now declare that the only way to defend itself is to acquire nuclear weapons.
So, Marc, I was just actually wondering where the US and the role of Donald Trump comes into all of this. We heard Donald Trump today, he's been at the G7 meeting over in Canada, meeting Marc Carney, and he'd say Iran is not winning the war and they should talk immediately before it's too late. So this is what Donald Trump is calling on Iran to make a deal, to talk immediately. But do you think that Iran is going to want to come to the table following the escalation in strikes we've seen?
Yes, actually, there are, among the expert community, there are different interpretations. There is this one scenario that's, according to which Trump has been, in a sense, overtaken by events, bypassed, and Netanyahu sort of forced the U.S. into this, into supporting Israel in this offensive, although Trump didn't really want to get involved in a new war in the Middle East. He was very critical of his Democrats predecessors, Obama and Biden, for the so-called unending wars. But at the same time, he in a sense, he's sort of the prisoner of this strategic alliance with Israel. And the other scenario is that this idea of negotiating a new deal with Iran on its nuclear program, of course, a bilateral deal that Trump could claim all the credit for himself, maybe apply for the Nobel Peace Prize, that all this was purely Machiavellian staging to lure the Iranians and in fact, weaken their potential resistance to the Israeli strike. At this stage, it's just impossible to decide which is true, but the fact is that in any case, Iran will suffer from whatever form of support Israel gets from the United States. Now we can see there's this exchange of missiles, and of course Israel has some advance. It has a better air defense system, the Arrow system, the Iron Dome, although this is mostly for short-range missiles. But in a way, all this will not be able to last forever. Israel will need to replenish its ammunition, its missiles to intercept the Iranian missiles.
Professor Marc Finard, I'm so sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. We're just running out of time, but great to have you on the show and your insights. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
US President Donald Trump has met with Canada's Prime Minister Marc Carney ahead of his first G7 sessions. The meeting comes amid heightened trade tensions and Trump referring to Canada as the 51st US state. The two leaders previously held a cordial meeting at the White House in May. Trump's G7 meeting with Carney is amid the ongoing Israel-Iran conflict. Speaking to reporters, Trump declined to answer whether the US would become directly involved, instead urging Iran to return to nuclear negotiations.
They should have done that before. I had 60 days and they had 60 days, and on the 61st day, I said, we don't have a deal. They have to make a deal. And it's painful for both parties, but I'd say Iran is not winning this war. and they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
For more on this, I'm joined by US and Middle East expert Akhil Abbas from Washington, D.C. Akhil, a pleasure to have you on the show. We just heard from Donald Trump there speaking at the G7 meeting, and we know the conflict between Israel and Iran will likely dominate the meeting of the leaders in Canada today. World leaders including Donald Trump. There's a lot to talk about, but they're calling for de-escalation in the Middle East. What do you think the G7 can realistically achieve in terms of relationship between Israel and Iran at the moment?
Thank you very much for having me. I think the main player here is the U.S., and news reports emerged just recently, probably in the last 1 or 2 hours, that Iran has approached, the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. Oman is probably drafting a proposal to end the hostilities between Iran and Israel and go, immediately, directly towards a speedy conclusion of, the nuclear deal based on, the proposal that the U.S. gave. This would work the best for Donald Trump. He has been adopting a wait-and-see approach until Iran, turns around and says, "I'm ready." I think he couldn't prevent Israel from beginning the attack, but he adjusted himself politically for the attack. Trying to gain as much as possible from it. Military pressure on Iran to push it to sign the deal. So I think the two sides, the U.S. and Iran, still have enough common ground to work on. It has to be fast. Now, can Donald Trump pressure Israel to end its military operation against Iran? I think that's the key element here. It will be difficult for Iran to go negotiate and sign the treaty really fast while it's being bombarded every day. It would be, a sign of humiliation. It needs some face-saving measure, and Trump should be able to provide this by pressuring Israel to halt its operations now.
So, Akhil, I think you actually read my mind, because my next question was, is it right that the only person who can really put any pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu is President Donald Trump? And if so, what evidence do we have that he is prepared to actually do that?
His political calculations, Trump wants to have some sort of achievement in foreign policy. Now he could say, I'm achieving two things in one shot. I'm ending this war, just like, his pride in ending the Pakistan-India, fight. I'm ending this war in the Middle East, like my predecessors who tend to basically make wars without ending them. And I am concluding, this nuclear deal that will hopefully pave the way for stability in the region, investment, normalizing Iran as part, of the regional and international landscape, not as a pariah state, so on and so forth. So I think his political interest would make him adopt this approach. And could he pressure Netanyahu? Yes, I think he can. He's an impulsive sort of guy, politically speaking. So so far, there isn't really a public difference between Israel and the United States. Trump has been unusually disciplined. So if he asks Israel to stop the fighting and then Israel refuses, he could apply a variety of pressures. He could make it public. And I think it would be hard for Netanyahu and, domestically speaking also, to go against the most supportive U.S. president of Israel. So I think he has a lot that Trump can do, but I think he needs guarantees that Iran would not take the time to sign, the nuclear deal. Go fast, sign it immediately, probably a day, 2 days, whatever it is. Iranian face saving requires, but a deal is finished. He gives it to the Israelis, to the American public. I achieved these two things. So we could be close to a final resolution of this conflict, but we all know the last hours are probably the most critical hours.
Yes, absolutely. But as the strikes between Israel and Iran do continue, we are hearing Iranian missiles struck the city port of Haifa today, which is concerning, of course, investors and analysts over the oil situation in the Middle East. What have reactions been from the Arab world, and who are Iran's allies in the region?
Iran really doesn't have allies in the region, like allies in the true sense of the word, like Israel has allies, not necessarily in the region, but, European and so on and so forth. So European and Western allies. The Arab world approach, I think, thoughtfully to this conflict has been cautious. There's this historical fatigue with Iran, the conflict with it, the larger part of the last 46 years since the Islamic Revolution, and just in a variety of ways. Iran has an expansionist, foreign policy. Arab countries worry from it. Iran has, non-state actors, so on and so forth, the usual story. But I think in this conflict, there are some lessons learned. We shouldn't antagonize Iran. Iran sent signals that it doesn't want, to get into a conflict with the Arab countries. Now the Arab countries are the ones who are basically acting as the middleman between the U.S. and Iran. And that is a very good sign. The Iranians, because they don't really have allies, now they have reached out to the Arab world, to the Gulf countries to help mediate this. There were also contacts before this, the phone conversation between the Iranian president and the Saudi crown prince. Oman has been, working on this, Qatar also. So I think, generally speaking, the Arab world decided not to get entangled in this conflict, although it has lots of stake in it. It's oil, it's investment, it's stability, so on and so forth, and all of these are basically endangered by an unstable Iran and the conflict with the United States. So if the Gulf countries help, pull this through, then I think it's a major achievement for
Akhil Abbas from Washington, D.C. there. We appear to be having some internet trouble on the line. I do apologize for that, some trouble on the line, but thank you for joining us and for your insights. That was US and Middle East expert Akhil Abbas, who was joining us from Washington, D.C. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. Counterpoints with Melinda Nusifora is coming up next. Goodbye and have a good evening.